Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I want to welcome everybody to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Trey Grayson, and I'm the director of the Institute of Politics here at the Harvard Kennedy School. Tonight, in addition to our usual audience of students, undergraduate students, graduate students, community members, we're joined by a couple dozen newly elected mayors as part of a seminar that the IOP and the U.S. Conference of Mayors is putting on to help those mayors with their transition to office. And so I want to welcome especially some of the mayors who are here in the audience, not only to the JFK Junior Forum, but also to Harvard and to the Kennedy School. We're excited to have you. I want to begin with just some ground rules that we have here at the Kennedy School so we can have a successful event. Freedom of speech and civility are bedrock principles here at the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum, at Harvard University, and in our democracy. So with that in mind, I ask all audience members to please refrain from interrupting any of our forum participants this evening. While I understand that some of us in the audience may have different opinions than some that are expressed on stage, I ask that everyone respect each panelist's right to speak his or her mind, as well as the audience's right to listen to tonight's panelists without interruption. We'll have time for question and answers after a few minutes of conversation up here on stage, and any questions and answers should be held to that time period, which is a mandatory feature of all forum events. Anybody who violates this policy or otherwise disrupts this event will be subject to being escorted from the venue by the Harvard University Police and may be subject to legal proceedings. But we're all going to follow tonight's rules, and we're going to add this to our long list of successful John F. Kennedy Jr. forums. So with that out of the way, I want to introduce our four panelists, and then we'll start some conversations. To my immediate left is Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who became Baltimore's 49th mayor in February 2010. Previously, she served as the city council president for about 4 years and was first elected to council at the age of 25, the youngest member ever to the Baltimore City Council. So we're pleased to have her with us. To her left, yeah, we can clap. Yeah. Mayor Nutter always says he's got Mayor Rawlings Blake's back, and so there with the applause leading it, thank you. Mayor Michael Nutter is the 98th mayor of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, taking office in January 2008. He served prior to his time on mayor for several terms on city council and has a number of initiatives that are pretty exciting, including a Green Works initiative. So we're pleased to have him. Mayor Nutter. Mayor Michael Hancock just became the mayor of Denver, sworn in office in July 2011. He also served on Denver City Council for a couple terms before being elected and was president of the Urban League for nearly 5 years. He actually became president of the Urban League at age 29, becoming the youngest such president in the country. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Hancock. And on my far left is my colleague from Kentucky, Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher, who took office on was elected to office in November 2010 as Louisville's 50th mayor. He's an entrepreneur, a businessman, and so holding political office for the first time, and succeeded the guy we called the mayor for life in Louisville, Jerry Abramson, who only seemed like he was mayor for life, but was for mayor for like 20 of the previous 24 years. Mayor Fisher, glad to have you. We entitled tonight's forum Mayors on the Front Line. Mayors, all elected officials have tough jobs nowadays, but it seems like the mayors maybe have the toughest jobs in America. And there, I see all the mayors, the newly elected mayors nodding. They're on the front line on a lot of issues, not just, and historically mayors have been on the front line for the crime issues, maintenance issues, but we're seeing pothole, all the things you think of, getting a city running, police, safety, fire, all that. We're seeing, though, in the last couple of years, mayors taking the leadership in a lot of other issues, including education, because that's so important, and jobs, because we're in the middle of a deep recession. Tonight, we're going to ask each of the panelists to talk about things that they've had to deal with in their times as mayor. None of them have been mayor all that long, and they've had interesting tenures. Mayor Rawlings Blake, who's right next to me, we'll start off with you. One of your priorities when you were on council, and then it continued when you became mayor, has been trying to reduce gun violence in Baltimore. And you have a couple of initiatives. Tell us a little bit about it, and how do you rate the success of those initiatives?
Give it an A+.
Give it an A+? All right. You just got reelected.
Right. You know, when I think about the possibilities for Baltimore, one of the things I see is a safer city. That is one of you know, the goals, the priorities that I have in everything. You know, I talk about better schools, safer streets, and stronger neighborhoods. And I was determined to make an impact when it came to violent crime in our city. We have lost far too many, and most of these are African American males, young African American males, senselessly on the streets of Baltimore. So we have a very focused strategy, and we've been successful. In my first year as mayor, we got the homicide rate down to the lowest it's been since 1985. When our esteemed former Mayor William Donald Schaefer, who we laid to rest this year, was mayor. So that's it was a long time ago, and we're at today, and I'm knocking on wood because the year's not over, but we're on track to be at least another 10%. Okay. That. And it's simple. We're focusing on the most violent offenders, and we are focusing our police efforts, adding more resources in the areas that have historically shown high violence, and working with our partners to make sure that we're tracking these individuals. So we have a gun registry. So if you're convicted of a gun crime, you're on the registry. The police know where you are. They go visit your house, and that's had the recidivism rate for arrests for gun crimes significantly reduced. I think it's about 3% for the individuals that are on the gun registry. So we're doing a few other things, but those are the main components of it.
Great. Mayor Nutter, earlier in the year, there was a lot of national coverage about flash mobs in Philadelphia, which put you in a unique position having to deal with that type of crime, which is really unusual, maybe the first time we'd ever seen something like that. Tell us a little bit about that and how you handled that tough issue.
We'd had some of this activity last year as well. Just literally, it flashes up. And social media is certainly one of the contributors. A lot of activity going on. And I told the young people at that time, you know, kind of broadcast to the city, a big press conference back in, I believe it was March of 10, that if we saw any more of this kind of activity, we'd have to take stronger measures. But we did have a big show of force, not just from the police department, but community leaders and civic leaders and business people in a particular area in South Street, if you know Philadelphia. And then we went out on a walk with families, and just to kind of reassure folks that things are okay. And for the most part, things had kind of calmed down. Then this year, this past summer, in June, we had an incident that flared up, and there was some violence associated with it. And then in July, I was away on vacation. 4 young people in a larger pack started literally beating people up as they were running down the street and taking advantage of some folks in Center City. 4 arrests, 1 19, 1 17, 1 16, and 1 11. Which, for obvious reasons, was particularly disturbing. I'd kind of had enough. And while I was still away, basically wrote my remarks of what I was going to say to the citizens when I came back. My police commissioner, Commissioner Ramsey, suggested that we might want to look at lowering the curfew. Philly has had a curfew on the books, episodically enforced, not enforced, over many, many years. We've had one since 1955. We then decided that I would deliver this message at my own church. And I said some things that were on my mind. I delivered the speech exactly the way I wrote it, sent it back to my folks and said, do not edit this speech. They were a little nervous.
Staff tend to be like that.
I thought that there were some things that needed to be said, and the next day we announced that we were in fact changing the curfew, but we didn't lead with that because that's not the solution. What was really the issue was how many programs and services that we have, and I actually stole a bit of an idea. A few of us were out in Los Angeles with Mayor Villaraigosa earlier this year, and they have a Saturday Night Lights program. They extended the hours at their rec centers and other facilities. And so I couldn't do what he did, but I knew that we could target 20 of our biggest centers. We did extend the hours. We had some dances and parties and bowling activities and roller skating events, but we did also come down really hard on the teens with the curfew. We also have a law that allows us to fine parents if their children violate a curfew. Many of our parents didn't know that, and I talked a lot in that speech at the church about parental responsibility. I was very, very serious about what I had to say. And then the next day we announced with a tremendous amount of support from clergy and community and others. I think, to my fellow mayors and certainly the new mayors, there will be moments where you will just really have to say what's on your mind and let people know that you're not messing around. That was one of those moments, and I think the young people heard me, and parents did as well, and things have been relatively calm since then, but I'm pretty serious.
Yeah. Good. Moving on to Mayor Hancock. He just got elected, and we were talking at lunch. We sat at the same table, and he was telling us that one of his top priorities when he ran for mayor was to try to improve education in Denver. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges in most American cities is that that's probably the biggest issue that voters care about. Mm-hmm. But it's hard for folks who aren't involved directly with the school system. Most cities, the mayors do not have an official role in education. It's indirect. But Mayor Hancock wants to make this one of his top priorities. I just wanted to know what are some of the ideas you have about doing that, and have you been able to, only been in office a few months, have you been able to make much progress in going beyond the bully, obviously using the bully pulpit,
Sure.
but doing more than that?
Sure. I think that I don't want what Mayor Nutter just said to be lost, because I think it's very critical, not only on the issue of youth activities and youth violence, but also on this issue of education. And that is that as mayors and as elected leaders, we're expected to not only to serve and manage the city and manage it well, but also to lead. And one of the challenges of that is that you're oftentimes surrounded by people who are always trying to, they're going to massage the message, they're going to make sure the message is crisp and politically correct. And as leaders, we have instincts, and our instincts tell us this is how I would roll on this message, and this is how I would go. And often, Trey, on the issue of education, that's exactly how I came out of the box. I was in a town hall meeting of about 300 residents. I had either just announced I was running for mayor, or I was on the verge of announcing in a very few short days that I was going to run for mayor. And the Denver school system was announcing a complete transformation or reform of some schools in a particular part of town. I happen to represent them on city council. And I sat in that room and I listened to people push back about wanting to transform these schools, understanding that these schools have been some of the worst performing schools in the city of Denver. And for the life of me as a father, I couldn't understand why we would push back on something that hasn't worked, and on an idea that was going to be innovative, bring in new programs, and give our young people an opportunity. And I stood up in that meeting, and I made it very clear that I could care less whether they ever voted for me again. But tonight I needed them to stand in the gap for the children of Denver and to make the very difficult decision to try something new. And that moment became kind of that cataclysmic moment where people often talk about, are you running for mayor? Are you trying to be the superintendent? And my response to them has always been, there is not a more influential, broader bully pulpit than the mayor's office to talk about or to raise the level of conversation around the issue of education. And if my job is to get this city economically and culturally competitive and to make sure that we build this city for the long term, then we're going to start with the littlest child and we're going to take them to their career. And that means that our greatest investment is in that school door. And also for the city of Denver's mayor, my greatest impact is on the other side of that school door to make sure they can get there safely and that we can support education. And so what we've done is we've convened our stakeholders, business, private sector, nonprofit, university, and colleges. They're not only putting their name on a piece of paper to make a commitment to what they're going to do to help improve our schools, but they're bringing dollars to the table as well. And we're going to partner with DPS, Denver Public Schools, to make sure that every child, no matter where they live in the city, will not have their effectiveness determined by their zip code or the quality of their school determined by their zip code. And if the traditional schools aren't working, then we'll find the schools that are charter, private, whatever, to come in and to replace that school so that every child has an opportunity.
Great. I know Mayor Fisher took office earlier this year, and transportation infrastructure investments are something everybody on this stage could probably talk a long time about, the need for more investments to both expand our infrastructure as well as replace and repair our existing infrastructure. A few months ago, he was faced with a situation, it's probably something you didn't talk about much in your campaign, when the Sherman-Minton Bridge became a big deal. Could you tell the audience about that bridge, what happened, and how you've been handling it, because it's still going on, the problem with that particular bridge?
Well, I'm a business guy that happens to be mayor right now, and I never thought I'd be excited about roads and bridges and sewers and things like that, but you get excited about that when you're mayor. And we've got to deal with really local issues that sometimes have their roots in international competitiveness, and this is really the story of what the Sherman-Minton Bridge is all about. The day after President Obama announced the Jobs Act, and you'll recall he spoke about roads and bridges, and we're losing our competitiveness nationally. And for those of us that have been out of the country, especially when you go to a place like China and see the investment that they're making in their airports and their roads and their bridges, and here we are, the greatest country in the history of modern civilization, and you take a look at some of our infrastructure, you know, there's a disconnect here. And so when we're talking about upgrading and fixing our roads and bridges, and we have unemployment and construction trades at 20% and record low interest rates, and we can't get it done as a country, people in Louisville are pulling their hair out. It's like, what's the problem here? So well, gridlock in D.C. is a symptom of the problem that we have here. So what happens in Louisville? Friday, 4 o'clock, rush hour. The governor of Indiana, so in Ohio River is between Indiana and Kentucky. A stress fracture is identified on the bridge. Got to close the bridge down. There's 2 interstate highways and 1 local access bridge. Louisville's 60% of the country is within a day ride, so 3 interstates converge there. It's a big deal in terms of getting out and about. So when you close an interstate bridge like that, it is major dislocation and disruption to people, the economy, and everything else. And yet we're having this argument that we can't upgrade our infrastructure. So we'll get it fixed in about 6 months, so in March it'll be open again. People have kind of recalibrated themselves, but I say we're 1 bridge away. If another bridge went down, we'd basically be back into the 1800s in terms of cross-river mobility on a major interstate system that goes through our country. So, you know, one question is, you know, what's wrong with our country now? You know, that we have this screaming need for jobs and this screaming need to upgrade our infrastructure. It's not like these things that are happening in other countries are a mystery to us. We see them real time by just looking on our PDAs. So we're losing our competitiveness. We need jobs. We've got exhibit A, B, C, all the way to Z times 1,000 all over the country right now. So that's one issue. The second issue is we have one of the largest infrastructure projects in the country that hopefully is going to start in about a year. It's called the Ohio River Bridges Project. 2 new bridges going across the Ohio River, so it will add 2 to the 3 that we have, and it's just essential for our economic competitiveness. Started off as a $4 billion project. We value engineered it down. It's the 2 governors, Governor of Kentucky, Indiana, and myself are the key decision makers on that. So it's only a $3 billion project now. But the question is, how do you pay for these major infrastructure projects now? So back in the day, Washington, D.C. would stroke the big check for the most part. And as we all know, that's not the way the world is right now. So in this age now where we have aging infrastructure in our country and the need for jobs, how are we going to pay for this stuff? That's a critical question to all of us. In this particular case, about 1/3 will be tolls, 1/3 will be from the state of Indiana, and 1/3 from Kentucky as well, if it all works out the way it's supposed to. But these are very complicated projects, environmental impacts, economic impacts, et cetera. They're not easy. So how do you get it done in an era when there's no money, when we got to have the jobs?
One theme that's occurred over the last couple of months, which has really affected all cities, even affected our campus, is the occupation movement. And I wanted to ask all of you about how that has impacted your city and how you've gone through about, you know, making the decisions on how to handle it. We were talking back in the green room about, you were kind of all sharing stories about it. Why don't we start here with Mayor Rawlings-Blake? What kind of occupation movement is in Baltimore? You know, how long's it been there? How big's it been?
We've had a movement for about 2 months, and we've had the population go up and down. Sometimes it's over 100, sometimes it's around 40, 50, 60 people. They've set up tents, and they have a General Assembly meeting every day, and it's been, for the most part, peaceful. There have been some things that have caused concern. When we had a few incidents where we got the notion that they were trying to suppress incidents of reporting crime, that things would happen in the area, and they were suggesting to people in the encampment that they not tell the police about it, and that's not going to fly. We just, for me, I just want to make sure that that if we have vulnerable populations in the city. I'm talking about people who are suffering.
And it's right downtown.
Yeah,
and
right
it's a
in
public
smack,
space, right?
Yes, public space, right smack in the middle of downtown. People that are suffering from mental illness or homelessness, that have some have joined that movement. That we do everything we can to bring services. So people know what is available to help. So we have encouraged them to remove the tents. We've been patient because there's no argument about the things that they stand for. I think everyone in the city, we have a city like many that's struggling. Mm-hmm. So we're not saying that there is economic equality in the country. There's no argument. We all agree that we need more jobs, more opportunities for young people. There's no argument. So what do we do? What do we do next? We see that everyone agrees that there's a right to free speech that must be protected, but after that, there's work that needs to be done. So hopefully, in Baltimore, we'll get there.
Yeah, Mayor Nutter, how have you balanced the freedom of speech and the importance of the issues with public safety?
Sure.
And in your case, economic development, because there's a unique angle to Philadelphia.
Occupy came to Philadelphia, their leaders, or some representatives, rather. I met with them on October 5th. They came to Philadelphia on October 6th. They said that they wanted to exercise their free speech rights. They wanted to talk about serious issues, and I said, as long as you operate within the law, that you're not violent, that you're not destroying property, et cetera, we'll be able to get along. But I do need to mention to you that we have a $50 million revitalization project scheduled for this fall. For part of they were literally on City Hall apron on the west side of the building, and that this is a project that represented nearly 1,000 jobs. Your cause is about economic justice and employment and working with the 99%. Well, this is a project for the 99%, built by the 99%, and there will come a time. We had a permit, and the permit would expire when the construction project started. We gave notice, a lot of notice, but they were mostly peaceful. They had demonstrations. They tell us where they were going. Our police would go with them. We really didn't have many incidents. There were 3 occasions where clearly, as a part of their civil disobedience component, they wanted to be arrested. We did not want to arrest them, but you can't block streets or sit in on private property. So we did have those. We videotaped all of them. We read, officers at every roll call were read the First Amendment. We give 3 warnings at intervals, and there was never any violence in any of those arrests. This morning, we needed to relocate Occupy Philadelphia. We gave them a permit to a space literally across the street from City Hall in a big plaza, very prominent location. No tenting, no sleeping, no overnight activity from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. But we did go in last night at about 1, cleared the area out by 2, and secured that area. There were no fights, no incidents or anything. There were some subsequent arrests off the property. Folks didn't want to move out of the street. But I've been very straightforward with Occupy Philadelphia. I think as Mayor Rawlings-Blake said, the issues being raised, unemployment, poverty, accumulation of, disproportionate accumulation of wealth, lack of lending by banks, et cetera, all issues that every one of us up here have talked about before there was ever an Occupy movement. So I don't have any issue with the message. Mm-hmm. But I think increasingly When you're spending, in our case, some weeks 50, some weeks upwards of $100,000 that you had not budgeted for overtime for various services in cities that have all been hit hard by the recession, you have to get to a point where, turn this movement into action. And a lot of that action, quite honestly, is not necessarily going to be in our cities. I mean, I can't do anything about banking policy. Mm-hmm. Or the accumulation of wealth, or a bunch of these things. It really is about Washington D.C. and what the Congress is doing.
And they haven't made it local. They haven't made local demands.
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a couple of local issues that folks didn't like, and we had some back and forth about that. But the larger national issues that they're talking about are literally not within our realm. They're not within our purview. So national issues playing out at the local level, costing us money, at times disrupting activities in the city. Philadelphians were tremendously patient. We're generally a patient bunch, except with our sports teams. Right. That was last night.
We're not going to talk about the Eagles today, Mayor.
No, so thank you. But no violence, and for all 55 days, we have conducted ourselves virtually the same way every day, with dignity.
Good. You mentioned... Please stop interrupting. If you do not stop interrupting... All right. Harbor Police, please remove these people. Mic checks are not permitted in the forum. You now will be removed by the Harbor Police.
We love Philadelphia. We love Philadelphia. Mic check. We love Philadelphia. We love Philadelphia. You sent people to the hospital last night. You sent people to the hospital last night. You can't evict an idea. You can't evict an idea.
All right. Well, now we're going to have a conversation with the folks who respect the rules. We all love Philadelphia, though. And nobody loves Philadelphia more than the mayor. Mayor Hancock, I was reading today on the internet. Y'all just did a tabulation of the costs incurred to date, and it was staggering. What was that number? If you could share with the audience and maybe give your perspective on this as well.
Between the state and the city of Denver, and you should know that there's a street that separates state land versus city land. We have spent together almost $800,000 in dealing with the Occupy Denver movement for the past two and a half months. Denver alone has spent about $430,000 of those dollars. That's just calculating overtime and materials. That's not calculating actual dedicated resources that are on schedule, or at least having officers there who are on shift. There's been a tremendous cost. That's what we're able to calculate today. We have not been able to calculate the damage to our Civic Center Park, because they have been people who have part of the Occupy Denver or who have moved in with Occupy Denver have the trash and the defecating and urination on public property has really been what we've been trying to manage. But there will be this is some very expensive and old stone that we'll have to clean. And I will say today that while I was away, we did go in today and clean the stone. We power washed it. And Occupy Denver has been very cooperative. We asked them to pack their stuff up and to move so we can go in and clean it up. And they did. And they completely left the area, vacated the area, and allowed us to clean it up. And they, for the most part, have complied with our laws, Mayor Nutter, to the same point. No camping, do not erect tents. And like Philadelphia and other cities across this country, Denver has said, we will honor your First Amendment right to free speech and to assemble. We ask you to observe our ordinances. We do not allow you in our parks. Anyone. I can't be in the parks after 11 p.m. That's for our maintenance and for safety. And we do not allow erection of our tents in the park. And so when you do that, then we're going to move in and take them down. And that's all we ask. Again, that's for everyone's safety. But also for the sanitation part, and that is that you not serve food that you're not able to properly store. When there has been some police movement, it's been because they have either done something that puts themselves in danger or other people, such as going to sit in the middle of one of our major arterials in downtown Denver, our main Broadway street. And so our officers had to move in order to get them out of the street. So it's things like that, but it has been an awfully costly effort at a time when we can least afford it. This year, the first act I had to take between July and November was to close a projected $100 million budget gap for 2012. We have challenged cities, and we are spending resources that we simply don't have to manage this movement.
Yeah, and you can't afford to have another million, hole you got to fill.
Mayor, I bet you could be in the park after 11 o'clock.
Don't get me in trouble.
Yeah. Mayor Fisher, you were telling me off stage, you just had to move the occupation.
We moved it from across City Hall to another location just because we had some holiday activities taking place there.
Right.
So public safety and public health, if they're followed, we've been in an accommodation mode with our folks. Louisville is known as a great city of hospitality and compassion. And some of the Occupy folks came to my last public forum. I have a monthly forum to talk to me there. And they said their goal was to set the model for discourse and show the rest of the world how we could do this. Now, that being said, the demands are unclear, as we've all said up there. I mean, I think the bigger issue that we're all real sympathetic with here is that people just don't know what to do. Where do I get a job? Why is unemployment so high? What's our hope for the future? I mean, this is what's being played out at the beginning of the movement, I think. I think, Mayor, you said, there's been some anarchists that are coming in. They're trying to use this as a platform for their own message. But it's a commentary on where our country is right now, and a commentary, again, I'll take it back to the infrastructure paralysis that I talked about before, the paralysis that we see in D.C. right now that leads to 9%, 12% unemployment in some cities.
Sure, Mayor.
For the rest of the listening audience, there was one individual who did have to go to the hospital last night. One of our police horses stepped on her foot and injured a couple of her toes. She was taken to the hospital. It's the only person who ended up in the hospital last night as a result of the relocation. I just wanted you to know that.
Now's the time.
Is this mic check thing? Is that mic check? Is that part of your brand in the city? Or
No,
is that
the mic check's the way they do
Mic check
things.
is Occupy engagement.
Gotcha.
It's a replication of whatever the last person
Yeah, it
said
allows
and
them to do the speeches
yeah.
without amplification.
Right, exactly.
So what you just saw is how they
it
do
goes
the
down the
rallies.
row. So person
They really
says something, then the next row says it, and it keeps going back. That's what that's about, and it starts with mic check.
Well, mic nut or mic check.
So I guess
No,
they're not doing that.
no.
They're not doing that. They're not doing that back.
It was
I'm trying to loosen it up a little bit.
MIC. Yes. No, I understand. Thank you so much.
It's good. See, people in Louisville are friendly and commenting all that. Now is the time we want to invite our audience members to participate in the conversation. So we have 4 microphones, 2 on the floor, 2 on the stairs on the way up. We'll try to get through as many of the questions as we can. One of the things that will help us get through so many questions will be if the questioners follow the following format. 1, identify yourself and your affiliation. 2, keep your question short and that it actually is a question that ends in a question mark. And that does not contain a speech in between your identification and the question mark. We'll start right here with the gentleman in the green shirt.
John Trumpor, Harvard Law School. My question is mainly for the mayor of Baltimore. When you started your presentation, you stressed how in Baltimore the homicide rate is at the lowest since 1985. But I've noticed there's a lot of unhappiness with you among police, fire, and some of the public safety workers, especially over the issue of pensions. They say they've offered you over $70 million in concessions. I think the city has to close a $120 million gap for public employees. They feel, why won't you negotiate with them? We hear a lot about Scott Walker, about not talking with unions and doing collective bargaining, but it seems like a lot of Democrat leaders have used this crisis to really erode collective bargaining and not sit down and negotiate. They don't get Social Security and disability.
So
yes, I'd like to ask about why won't you negotiate with public employees?
I negotiated with the fire and police and asked them to sit at the table as we work through the fire and police pension system. The issue isn't whether I negotiated. The issue is they didn't like the answer. They're certainly free to disagree, but to suggest that I'm not sitting down is just It's not true. It's a lie. I have a monthly meeting with organized labor. We talk about there's an open agenda. Anything the organized labor wants to talk about, I will talk about. We've talked about pensions. We worked all through the process. We had a disagreement about whether or not we should change the retirement age for existing fire and police officers. I said we should in order to balance our budget. They said we shouldn't. The courts agreed with me. They said that we should change other parts of our fire and police pension system. I'm knocking them down one by one in court. So it's not about whether or not I'll negotiate. I negotiated. I was hoping to get more cooperation, especially since when I had the $121 million budget deficit. I did not lay off one single firefighter. I did not lay off one single police officer. So to suggest that there's some, the priorities out of whack or I don't care about fire and police is ridiculous. I cut my own office by 20%. I didn't lay off one of them. So we just disagree. We're in court, and I'm winning.
Pensions have been a big issue. Mayor Nutter, you're in your second term. I mean,
Yeah.
from day one to now, how much of how much bigger is the impact on your budget now?
We have a defined benefit pension plan. The public sector is the absolute last bastion of defined benefit plans. They are completely unsustainable under any set of circumstances. Our plan is 47% funded. We now have more retirees than we have public employees. We go through interest arbitration with police and fire and regular collective bargaining with our two ASME unions. We got in arbitration with our police for the first time in the city's history a hybrid pension plan for new police officers, or if you want to be in the old plan, you have to pay more. Receive the same through interest arbitration with fire as well. This is an environment where no one wants to give up anything, and everyone wants to hold on to what they have. Well, I'd like my hair to come back, but that's just not that's just not going to happen. This is a time where in our situation, I said this is a shared sacrifice. Everyone has to put something on the table. So what did I do? I cut my pay. I took furlough days. I cut my chief of staff and every top-ranking person in the government. And furloughs with pay cuts and any number of things. I don't ask anybody to do what I'm not prepared to do myself. And you go through these negotiations, and much like Mayor Rawlings Blake, when folks don't like the answer, we get accused of, well, you're not negotiating. No, I made my position pretty clear. You don't like it, and so, until we can reach some other understanding, what is it that we're talking about here? I don't have any money. It's pretty straightforward. And so, all of us have tried to figure out how do we provide high-quality service without massive layoffs. And I'm not saying anything about any other city because every city is different. But much like, again, my good friend to the right here, didn't lay off one police officer, not one firefighter, not one sanitation worker, not one social worker. Reduced the size of the government by 1,600 positions. Had to fill a $2.5 billion 5-year plan deficit, partially with increased taxes and partially with cuts. Pretty much a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
Don't run the schools, raise taxes in an election year to fund public education in Philadelphia. So this is a tough job. Yeah. And some of you may have heard me say this before. If you have a deep-seated need to be loved and admired on a daily basis, you should not be in this business. You should go work in a pet shop. Okay? Because you have to make tough decisions. You have to say no to people morning, noon, and night. If you're not prepared to say no, especially to your friends, again, I would suggest this is not the business for you. It's not because I'm mean. It's not because I'm nasty. It's because we have a system that has accumulated the amount of a deficit over a 30 to 40-year period of time, and folks have been kicking that can down the road, and I made a decision, I'm going to be here when my time is done. Unlike some other cities, there's a term limit for mayors in Philadelphia, so I know what my situation is. And when my time is done, I'm going to live in this town. But I'm going to do everything that I possibly can to set that pension fund on the right course to make sure that we're not pouring hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of million dollars more into a system that will never recover without any kind of change. And that's what's required, especially in this environment. So no one is using a crisis to get change. Change needed to happen anyway. The crisis has exacerbated our situation. My last comment on this is in 2000, we were putting nearly $200 million of general fund money into our pension system. Next year, that number's over $600 million and growing if we do nothing. So doing nothing is really not an option.
Unless you two want to add something. Yeah.
We have to balance our budgets. You know, we can't print
Right.
money. So this is not something we take great pleasure in, but by law, we have to balance the budget. So just like you do it at home, we got to do it in the mayor's office.
Question up in the stairs. Yes.
Hi. Oh, sorry, that's very loud.
It is loud,
my name
yes.
is Melissa Barber. I am a junior in Kirkland House. I study social studies. My question is, as you probably expected, for Mayor Nutter. So your critics have accused you of violent action, police action. You acknowledge that a woman was hospitalized by police forces. When you say police forces, though, it wasn't a police officer. It was a horse that trampled her. While I'm concerned about these violations of the First Amendment, especially for peaceful protesters, I'm also concerned about those to the Fourth Amendment. A few years ago, you advocated for the establishment of prime emergency zones, which justified frisking, restriction of travel, and curfews to all citizens of the city. How do you justify the massive expansion of the police state under your tenure?
Okay. I mean, you know, that would all be interesting if any of it was correct. There was a court case in the U.S. Supreme Court, Terry versus Ohio, in 1968. I was 11 years old. And that allowed for what we now refer to in many police departments all across the United States of America as stop, question, and frisk, which is a constitutionally allowed tactic. And if you would like, you can certainly talk to the local Philadelphia ACLU, who will tell you that it is constitutionally allowed. I did not bring that to Philadelphia. As I mentioned, I was 11 years old when that case was determined by the U.S. Supreme Court. And virtually every police department in the United States of America uses that tactic to deal with the issues of primarily illegal guns. So as interested as you are about that issue, I'd also like you to be interested in the fact that 85% of the homicides in Philadelphia are committed with illegal weapons, and that 80% of the homicide victims in Philadelphia are black, and that 72% of those victims are black men. So I want folks to be focused on the issue of illegal weapons, and it is my responsibility to make sure that all of our citizens are safe. And so what I really want is not so much to stop questioning and frisking people. What I want folks to do is to stop shooting each other. That's what I want. And if you think that we're going to take your illegal weapon away from you and not carry it, then that's what I want you to do. Our police department is one of the best police departments in the United States of America. We do respect people's rights. We've had a curfew in Philadelphia since 1955. I was born in 1957, so I didn't bring that to the city either. We use it to make sure that our young people are safe, either not committing crime or not victims of crime. And so that's not the only thing that we're doing to help our young people. But, I mean, I appreciate your perspective, but those are the facts of what's going on in Philadelphia. And our crime rate is going down. Thanks.
I'd like to encourage the audience to check about the outcome of that court case, as it was not resolved as cleanly as you alleged.
Let's see, nobody's at that mic, so we'll come down here.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello?
Yeah, just keep talking, though.
All right. Well, okay, there it is. 5 years ago this month.
And you identify?
Oh, yeah, my name is Austin King. I'm an MPP1 here at the Kennedy School. I used to be a municipal official in Wisconsin. And 5 years ago this month, I was in San Francisco helping on a campaign that brought San Francisco up to the standard of the rest of the world with regard to paid sick days. Guarantees every worker the right to earn paid sick leave so that they don't have to make this terrible choice when they get sick, but whether to lose pay or go to work sick or send their kids to school sick, get other people sick. It's been working great. San Francisco's had a higher growth rate than any of the counties surrounding San Francisco. The ordinance has been replicated in Washington now, the city of Milwaukee, where it's on hold with the court case, and the state of Connecticut just adopted it too. I think it's pretty exciting. But Mayors Nutter and Hancock, you guys have spent a lot of capital fighting against similar proposals. What do you say to sick people? What should they do?
Well, let me let Mayor Hancock take the first one so we can let Mayor Nutter catch his breath for a second.
You know, I was asked this question a lot during the campaign, and I was moved by the compelling argument. And by the way, I want you to know I met with both sides of this campaign. I met with the sponsors of the bill in Denver, where it was called 9 to 5. It's a 9 to 5 group. I met with them on 2 occasions, and I simply said to them, I don't have a problem with the values that you're espousing here. What I'm challenged with is that you've singled my city out. You've singled my city out at a time that I'm doing everything I can to bring jobs into the city, to recruit companies into the city, to help small businesses get going in this city. And when I met with the small business community and I talked about this issue, and by the way, they brought it to me, their compelling argument was that we will lose jobs. I will have to stop hiring people, lay folks off in order to prepare myself to take care of this, this new piece of legislation. We also did an analysis and found that it would cost the city of Denver almost $800,000 just to prepare to implement the policy. They placed the onus of implementing this regulation in an agency that absolutely had no capacity whatsoever to implement it, to monitor it and to deliver whatever penalties or any kind of bureaucratic regulations or oversight. So that created a problem. So my opposition to it was based on the fact that I thought it was the wrong, although it was a good concept, right values, wrong process to bring it to the forefront or to the public, and two, that the fact you singled out a city of Denver as opposed to going to the state where I believed it belonged. And I suggested go to the state. They said we did. And I said, what happened? They said it failed. So I'm going to go back to the state. Let the state deal with this issue and not single the city out, the capital city of the state, while we're trying to do everything we can to remain competitive economically.
Let me say that I agree with, and I had the same exact situation in Philadelphia. I agree with everything that Mayor Hancock said. Philadelphia, as the city which unfortunately has the highest poverty rate of the top 10 cities in the United States of America, finds ourselves at often a competitive disadvantage with the counties around us. We're in southeastern Pennsylvania. Clearly, we have, unfortunately, still a high tax burden as compared to Bucks, Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery counties around us. Would absolutely have put the city at a competitive disadvantage just to our nearby neighbors. Absolutely would have cost us jobs. We went through the same analysis on this particular piece of legislation. Our administration testified to the merits of the issue, but could not put at risk, and certainly at this tenuous time, could not put thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs and business owners at risk in this particular environment. So that first bill, we had 2 bills. That first bill I vetoed, and our city council chose not to try to override that veto, given what was going on in the council, and I think other members truly understanding, and this was also during an election year, understanding that maybe this was not the right legislation at this time. A subsequent bill was put in that only affected companies that did business with the city of Philadelphia and provided a fair amount of flexibility for our administration in terms of implementation. That bill I did allow to go forward to approval without my signature because I still had the concern about negative impact on business, but it was a sign from me that I do care about the issue, and if you're doing business with the city of Philadelphia, that does create a different level of business relationship with us. Good idea. Timing probably could not have been worse, and the potential for negative impact is something that we as mayors, again, we get elected to represent the entire city and often have to make these kinds of challenging decisions that may not necessarily be what we want to do, but at times are things that we have to do to preserve and protect the city at large.
Mayor Fisher, Mayor Rawlings, Blake, have either of you been faced with this issue yet?
Well, I mean, just a general
Basically.
comment, Mayor Hancock here could have done that, but he would have had to lay off 100 people. So that's what you asked when you come with this type of thing. Which 100 of these people do you want me to lay off? I mean, that's what we're talking about in terms of the trade-off.
The San Francisco experience shows that the claims of the business community do never, it's just like minimum wage.
No, he's talking about, you're talking about city workers, right?
Yeah, these are city workers.
So, question over here.
My name is Ben Bradlow. I'm a master's in city planning student at MIT. And I think a lot of us who think about institutions that affect economies and politics in urban settings have taken a lot of symbolism from the occupations that have happened at many city halls throughout the country, and I know some of the mayors here have had that direct experience. And the kind of symbolism that I see is that there's a specific sense of economic inequality, but there's also a sense of a lack of political participation. And I think back to an experience that I had when I was working as a journalist in Philadelphia in 2009, where there were an interesting set of forums that you held, Mayor Nutter, regarding budget cuts that you were considering.
Yeah, that's my brilliant idea to have neighborhood community forums after I announced that we were going to close a $1.5 billion budget gap. Yes, that was a really smart idea on my part.
Well,
we had 8 of them.
Maybe you have a different view than the way I might put this forth, but I think that seemed like an opportunity that was never really realized. Because in a situation where all of you are saying that you have limited capacity, limited resources, the question becomes, and I think this is something that's implied by a lot of the occupations, how can cities draw on the resources of their city in a much broader perspective, including the kinds of the values, spirits, and experiences that come from ordinary people who are living in the cities. And if we're imagining new institutions, or rather I'm wondering, are mayors like yourselves willing to imagine new kinds of institutions that can include much broader participation of the public, given the severe constraints that you're facing?
Let me try to answer real quick. I mean, obviously you were in Philadelphia at that time. For the rest of the audience, I had 2 days after, at least for me, the most historic presidential election possibly for some of us in our lifetime. So that's a context. 2 days after that election, President Obama became president-elect, or Senator Obama became president-elect, I announced to the citizens of the city that we had a nearly $1.5 billion 5-year plan deficit, that we would not be able to have all of our swimming pools open in the next summer, that we might not have all of our libraries open, and a whole series of bad things that I announced. We had 8 town hall meetings at which upwards of 400 to 500 people came out to scream at us for 3 hours a night. So there was a lot of civic engagement in those forums. There was not a whole lot of dialogue and talking. And I believe in civic engagement as much as the next person. But again, we run businesses here. It's the business of government. You cannot run these entities, no matter how civically engaged folks are, you can't run them if you don't have any money. You can't pay for services with a handshake and a smile. You either have the dollars to pay for those services or you don't. So I'm more than willing to think about different structures, different ways of doing things, but I mean, you have to deal with your finance side of the house. As Mayor Fisher said, we have an obligation to balance our budgets. We cannot run deficits. So you're either going to raise taxes, cut services, or in my particular case, we did both. But you have to do something. And so I love people to be more civically engaged, but also have to balance the budget and run this government.
A rolling plate.
I know that, excuse me, I know that the key to having a thriving and growing city is civic engagement. That's why one of the things I've done in my administration, we have the first ever comprehensive volunteer plan for the city, where we went out and had conversations with community groups, with institutions, with businesses, and we were able to identify the problems, some of the major problems that we had in the city, and also identify ways that we could use the strength of our citizens to change the outlook for those problems. So we have It's called Step Up Baltimore. We have an initiative that is working with communities that even using, I think, some AmeriCorps volunteers to transform vacant lots in some of our blighted community into green spaces, and we have resources for those communities, so they plan the green spaces, and then we bring in volunteers to transform them. We're also doing something, we have a big problem in Baltimore with drug addiction, and we are using people who have had, I shouldn't say using, engaging people who have been successful for 3 or more years in their recovery, and asking them to be this recovery core and bring the next generation through. Because someone who has been successful in recovery can speak to someone who is in the struggle in a way that most of us can't, and because they have actually walked in their shoes. And that was one of the most moving graduations that I've attended when we had our first graduation of the trained Recovery Corps members, because they could see that while they were once considered a scourge, a blight, a second-class citizen in our city, now we're looking at them as assets and a group of people that can help us turn this thing around when it comes to drug addiction in the city. So those are just two more initiatives in the Step Up Baltimore plan. But I do agree that we need to think about how we can engage with citizens in a way that has transformational impact in our city.
Mayor Hancock, Mayor Fisher, you want to?
Just briefly, I won this office with a rally cry that we are all Denver, and that, and the statement I would make to the audiences was that this is your city. And in order for us to get through these very difficult, most challenging economic times since the Great Depression, all of us are going to have to put the city on our shoulders and have to, one, bear the weight of having to make some very tough decisions and sacrifices, but also by engaging and bringing your true talents to the table and say, Mayor, where can I help this city move forward and make some of these major sacrifices, or, bring my skill set to help turn the city in the right direction and move forward. There is no greater time, I think, to fundamentally change the way government does business than this economic recession, and two, fundamentally be more aggressive about how we engage the public in a conversation around its finances, its economic health and well-being. But let me just say this: people still expect, I elected you to lead, and there's going to be a time when, and we all experience this. This is one of the most lonely jobs I've ever had, where I'm in that office and I have to make a decision and no one else can make it for me. I used to love it at City Council. I let somebody else make it. I'm going to defer to you and let you make this decision. But as mayor, there's no one else I can turn to. I can turn to all my advisors, but they're looking at me going, but this is your call, Mayor. And people still expect, you were elected to lead. Thank you for asking my opinion. I've given it to you. Now lead.
There's two things real quickly. One is we're just in an unprecedented stage in the world in terms of the amount of data that's available, and just more and more coming on. So we're opening up our data to the public so that apps are being developed using our data. Next weekend we're having a transportation camp where people that are interested in transportation are coming together, looking at all the data, creating some mobile apps for that, so you can do that on the technical side. The 3 pillars of our administration are lifelong learning, a healthier city, and an even more compassionate city. And people think it's funny to hear an elected official talk about compassion. But the point is, we don't have all the money in the world to take care of all our problems. Hopefully, we can help each other. Friends can help friends, strangers can help strangers, and we do that through community service. We had 8,000 people 3 weeks ago doing community service throughout the city, sometimes people for the first time. So we've got to try to engage people in the head. I guess you could say we're doing that with open data. We try to engage them through their heart with service.
We have time for one more question. We'll take it from the floor here. I apologize to the other folks who were standing in line. We just don't have time.
Okay. Joan Byron in the mid-career MPA program here at the Kennedy School. Not meaning this to be a softball question at all, but...
Softballs are okay.
Okay. But I mean, going back several years in New York, we were hearing about visionary things that Philadelphia was doing in the area of greening its infrastructure. And I'm asking Mayor Nutter and the other mayors as well, where in this fiscal environment that we now live in have you been able to kind of continue to advance a vision about sustainability, and where has that just had to be put on hold?
Yeah, I'll be quick. I think one of the things that people have been talking about for a long time is recycling in Philadelphia. Abysmal rates our city had when I came in office, a little less than 6%. It was every other week. We had like numbers 1 and 2. No one could ever keep track of the schedule, including myself. My neighbor, happened to be a rabbi, was what I refer to as a religious recycler. And so I just looked out my window every other week to see if Henry put his recycling out. I put mine out. I could never keep track of the recycling schedule, and I wanted to do it. We went to weekly, single stream, numbers 1 to 7. We're now at nearly 20% recycling in Philadelphia. When I came into office, we had to pay companies $35 a ton to take our recycling. Now they pay us $65 a ton to take it. And my only point about any of this is not just about, you know, kind of being green and hugging trees and all this other stuff, which is cool. It's about jobs. Because when that recycling company has that much product and they're paying us for it, they're putting more people to work, they're investing in their plant, and more people are getting more jobs in sustainability and the green economy in Philly because we're investing in that area. And so we're changing our zoning code finally after 50 years, putting sustainability standards as a part of that. The green economy is about jobs, and that's what we really have to stay focused on a regular basis, and that's our goal.
One of the things that I admired when I recently visited Philadelphia was their use of creative use of green space. So if there was a community, a kid's playground in a community, there would be a whatever that strip you call it, a green grass, yeah. But it would be for treatment, for water filtration.
For stormwater management.
There you go. So I was very impressed with that. So one of the things that we're looking at in Baltimore is how to steal your idea and take it on a bigger level, because we have a big problem in Baltimore with vacant homes. So the idea that we've been batting around with my senior team is, how can we deal with EPA regulations for stormwater management? How can we create vibrant green spaces? And instead of having these tracts of vacant homes, turn it into a community that all faces a wonderful park, and really get multiple benefits out of transforming these spaces. So I'm stealing your it's not the first thing.
It's available.
But we're looking to do more of that, because I think as the mayors have said, in lean times, you have to figure out how to do more with less. And I think this is just another example.
We've done a lot of the same things in Denver. We have new zoning code that allows us to, not zoning code, but more permitting policies with regards to our building standards. Every public building built now is LEED certified in Denver. But let me just tell you, one thing I'll add is that our airport now has 2 solar farms, which is very exciting, and they're not paid for by the airport. They're actually paid to lease space to these solar farms, and they also make money on the upside when they resell some of this electricity back to our utility company. And so we have 53 square miles around our airport, so we have a lot of space to do this. And companies are negotiating with the airport almost on a regular basis to get some of the space to put some solar panels.
Mayor Fisher,
I'll just add a little twist to it. Louisville's got a dynamic urban agriculture scene, a tremendous local food scene, so that has all kinds of benefits besides being green in terms of a healthy city, sustainable city. So, and just the last point, the private sector, business now knows being green is good for business, and the cost difference is narrowed tremendously, so I'm very optimistic about the future.
Well, tonight we've heard from 4 great leaders who've been on the front lines trying to make their cities an even better place to live, and we appreciate their sharing their evening with us to talk about these issues. And so thank you for a great evening. If you come back tomorrow night, we're going to have a forum on inequality, the underlying policy issues of the Occupy movement. And so we encourage everybody to, don't stay here for 24 hours, don't occupy the forum, but come back tomorrow night and let's have another great one. Thanks.
Thank you very much.